You know that moment when you realize that the person who should support you is precisely the one who diminishes you the most? Well, I lived through that for years, and what I'm about to tell you now will make you rethink everything about relationships, about dignity, and about the power that exists in simply saying no. My name is Rebecca, I'm 37 years old, and for almost a decade I was married to a man named Michael, a guy who in everyone's eyes was the perfect husband, the exemplary provider, the successful man that any woman should feel lucky to have by her side. But the truth is that behind that impeccable facade, there was someone who treated me as if I were invisible, as if my opinions didn't matter, as if my existence only made sense when I was serving him and his interests. And the worst part wasn't the way he treated me itself, but the fact that when I finally gathered the courage to ask for respect, to demand that he see me as an equal, he simply laughed in my face, in that condescending and cruel way that only those who have been belittled by someone who should love them can understand. That laugh echoed in my soul like a slap, like a sentence that said I didn't deserve to be taken seriously, that my needs were a joke, that my suffering was entertainment. But what Michael didn't know, what he could never imagine while laughing at me that fateful day in our living room, was that that would be the last time he would have reasons to laugh at my expense, because something inside me broke at that moment, or rather, something was freed, and I decided that if he wasn't going to give me the respect I deserved, then I would simply take back my life, my dignity, and my happiness, no matter what it cost. It all started subtly, as usually happens in toxic relationships that consume you little by little without you noticing until you're completely drained. I met Michael when I was 27, worked as an assistant in a marketing company, and lived that common life of a young adult trying to build her career and find her place in the world. He was a sales manager at a multinational company, earned well, had that charm of a confident man who knew what he wanted, and when he first asked me out, I felt special, chosen, as if finally someone had seen something valuable in me. The first months were magical, the kind you see in movies, with romantic dinners, affectionate messages during the day, plans for the future being woven while we walked hand in hand through the park. He said I was different from other women he had met, that I had substance, that he could imagine building a life by my side. And I, of course, believed every word, because when you're in love, when someone makes you feel like you're the most important thing in the world, you can't see the red flags that are already waving right in front of you. The first time I noticed something strange was when we decided to live together after a year of dating. Michael suggested that I leave my small apartment and move into his, which was bigger and better located, and that seemed to make sense at the time, a natural progression of the relationship. But as soon as I set foot in there as an official resident, things began to change in such a gradual way that I barely noticed what was happening. Suddenly, my opinions about the house decoration didn't matter anymore, because after all, that was his apartment, and he already had his way of organizing things. When I suggested we cook together, he would say I should be responsible for that since I left work earlier. And little by little, I took on all the household chores as if it were my natural obligation, even though I worked 40 hours a week. He started making comments about my clothes, saying I should dress more elegantly now that I was with him, that he had an image to uphold. When I wanted to go out with my friends, he would make that disapproving face and say I was neglecting our relationship, that real couples liked spending time together, and I, wanting to be the perfect girlfriend, gradually distanced myself from the people who truly loved me to dedicate myself entirely to someone who was transforming me into a smaller version of myself. But I still thought that was love, that relationships required sacrifices, that I just needed to try harder to make him happy and everything would be fine. A year later, we got married in a beautiful ceremony that he planned almost alone because, according to his words, he had better taste and more experience with events since he dealt with important clients at work. I just nodded and wore the dress his mother chose, invited the people he approved, and said yes in front of 200 guests he knew, while I only knew about 20. But I was happy, or thought I was, because he was happy, and I had learned that my happiness depended on his. The first years of marriage were a continuation of this pattern, only intensified, as if the ring on my finger had given him an official license to control me even more. Michael started criticizing my work, saying I was wasting my potential at a small company, that I should look for something better. But whenever I got an interview somewhere else, he would come up with a reason for me not to go, saying that company wasn't good enough or that the timing wasn't right. Over time, I realized he actually didn't want me to grow professionally because that would mean I would have more independence, more money of my own, more confidence, and he needed me to remain dependent on him, small in his eyes, so he could feel big. He completely controlled the household finances, even though I contributed with my salary, and when I asked to see the bills or participate in financial decisions, he would roll his eyes and say I didn't understand anything about money, that it was better to leave that with someone who knew what they were doing. I bought this story because he really earned more than me and seemed confident about investments and planning. But the truth is he just wanted to have all the power, all the final say, while I stayed there as a kind of domestic employee who, on top of that, paid part of the bills. And the saddest part is that I accepted all of this with a smile on my face, trying to be the understanding wife, the partner who didn't create problems, the woman his friends and family praised for being so dedicated and caring. On the outside, we were the perfect couple in social media photos, at barbecues with friends, at dinners at my in-laws' house. On the inside, I was dying a little each day, losing pieces of my essence, forgetting who I was before him, transforming myself into a shadow that only reflected what he wanted me to be. The last straw, the moment that changed absolutely everything, happened on an ordinary Tuesday, one of those days you would never imagine would be a watershed in your life. I had arrived home after a particularly difficult day at work, where my boss had praised a project I had led and suggested a possible promotion in the coming months. I was excited, wanted to share that news with Michael, thought he would finally be proud of me. I prepared his favorite dinner, set the table in a special way, even put on that outfit he always said he liked, and when he arrived, before he even took off his jacket, I told him about the possibility of the promotion, about how my work was being recognized, about how happy I was to be growing professionally. He looked at me with that expression I already knew well, that mixture of boredom and irritation, and said that was great, but that he had had a terrible day and needed to relax. We could talk about it later. I swallowed my disappointment, served dinner, and we sat there eating in silence while he fiddled with his phone, clearly more interested in anything than in me. After dinner, he threw himself on the couch and turned on the television, and I stood there in the kitchen washing the dishes, looking at that man who barely saw me, and something started boiling inside me, a rage I had swallowed for years, an indignation I had suffocated with excuses and justifications. I finished washing the dishes, dried my hands, took a deep breath, and went to the living room, turned off the television, and sat in front of him. He looked at me surprised, almost shocked that I had dared to interrupt his sacred relaxation moment, and asked what I was doing. And that's when I said, with a voice I barely recognized as my own, firm and determined, that we needed to talk, that I wasn't happy, that I felt disrespected, invisible, that I needed him to see me as a person, as a partner, and not as someone who was there just to serve his needs. I said everything I had kept inside for years, every hurt, every time I felt small, every moment when my opinions were dismissed, every occasion when I was treated as if my feelings didn't matter. I talked about how I contributed to that house as much as he did, that I worked, cooked, cleaned, took care of everything while he just showed up, ate and complained when something wasn't exactly the way he wanted. I said I needed respect, that I deserved to be heard, that our marriage couldn't continue that way if he wasn't willing to treat me as an equal. I was trembling as I spoke, my heart beating so hard I could feel it in my temples, because this was new to me. This was me finally setting boundaries, demanding the minimum that any human being deserves in a relationship. And you know what his reaction was? He laughed. Not a nervous little laugh, not an awkward smile from someone caught off guard. No. It was a loud, mocking, cruel laugh, as if I had told the funniest joke he had ever heard. He laughed so hard he had to wipe tears from his eyes, and when he finally managed to control himself, He looked at me with that expression of superiority I hated and said, in the most condescending tone possible, that I was being dramatic, that I must be premenstrual or something like that he didn't know where I had gotten those absurd ideas. He said I had a good life, that he gave me everything, that I should be grateful to have a husband who worked hard and provided for the family, instead of having these feminist fancies I was clearly picking up from some unresolved friend. Every word that came out of his mouth was like poison, but that laugh, that damn contemptuous laugh, was what really destroyed me, and paradoxically, was what saved me. At that moment, as he turned his attention back to the television, as if I wasn't even there, as if that conversation that had cost me all my courage was absolutely irrelevant, something inside me died, but something much stronger was born in its place. It was as if a fog that had been covering my eyes for years had finally dissipated, and I could see with absolute clarity who Michael really was, what our marriage really was, and most importantly, who I had become to please him. I saw a woman who had given up her dreams, her friendships, her identity, all to keep happy a man who didn't even have the basic decency to respect me. I saw years of my life wasted trying to be enough for someone who would never see me as enough, because the problem was never with me. It was always with him and his sick need for control and superiority. And at that moment, still standing there in the living room while he watched his show, as if nothing had happened, I made a decision that would change everything, that was so simple and yet so revolutionary that I could barely believe it had taken me so long to get there. I decided I was leaving. Not tomorrow, not when I gathered courage, not when circumstances were more favorable. I decided I was going to immediately start planning my exit from that marriage, from that gilded prison I myself had helped build, and that when I finally left, Michael would realize too late how much he had lost, not because I was some prize or because he would suddenly value me, but because life has a funny way of showing arrogant people that their actions have consequences. But I knew I couldn't just leave on impulse. I had nowhere to go immediately. I didn't have enough money saved because he controlled everything. And besides, I wanted to do this the right way. I wanted to leave with my head held high, not as a victim fleeing, but as a woman who had made a conscious choice to no longer accept crumbs of respect. So I started planning in silence, like a strategist setting up her move. The next morning, I woke up, prepared his coffee as always, kissed him on the cheek before he left for work as always, and as soon as the door closed, I started acting. The first thing I did was open a bank account in my name only, at a different bank from the one we used, where he would have no access whatsoever. I started transferring small amounts from my salary there every month, amounts he wouldn't notice missing, gradually building my emergency fund, my ticket to freedom. I reactivated contacts with friends I had abandoned during the marriage, making up excuses to leave the house on Saturdays, saying it was to go shopping or to the salon, when in reality I was rebuilding my support network, remembering who I was before I lost myself in that relationship. One of those friends, Jennifer, who had been my best friend before Michael isolated me from everyone, was shocked when I finally told her everything that was happening. All the years of disrespect, the way he treated me, and especially that cruel laugh when I asked for the minimum dignity. She offered me a room in her house when I was ready to leave, said I could stay as long as I needed, no pressure, no judgments, and for the first time in years, I felt I had someone truly on my side. Meanwhile, at home, I continued doing everything exactly as I always did, being the exemplary wife he expected, but now there was a crucial difference. I was doing that conscious that these were my last days in that role, like an actress fulfilling the last performances of a play before saying goodbye to the character forever. Michael didn't notice anything, of course, because he never really saw me, never paid enough attention to notice the subtle changes in my behavior, the different sparkle in my eyes, the way I smiled to myself sometimes, thinking about the freedom that was coming. He was so comfortable in his little world where he was the king and I the obedient subject that he never imagined a silent revolution was happening right under his nose. I also started documenting everything, writing in a diary every time he disrespected me, recording conversations where he put me down, taking screenshots of condescending messages, creating a detailed record of his behavior pattern, not because I wanted to sue or cause trouble, but because I knew that when the time came to leave, he would try to rewrite history, make himself the victim, say I was crazy or exaggerating, and I wanted to have concrete evidence of the reality we lived. I also consulted a divorce lawyer, in secret, during my lunch break at work, to understand my rights, what I was entitled to take, how the division of assets would work, since technically I also contributed financially to that house, even though the apartment was in his name. The lawyer, an experienced gentleman named Richard, guided me on all the steps I needed to take, assured me I wouldn't be left helpless from that situation, and that gave me the final confidence I needed to move forward with my plan. Parallel to all this, I started reconnecting with myself, with the Rebecca who existed before Michael, that woman who had her own dreams, strong opinions, who laughed loudly and didn't apologize for taking up space. I went back to reading the books I loved that he said were a waste of time. I started listening to the music I liked that he criticized for being too loud or too depressing. I went back to wearing the clothes that made me feel beautiful, regardless of his approval. Each small act of rebellion, each moment when I chose myself instead of pleasing him, was like recovering a piece of my soul that had been stolen, and I was increasingly liking the woman who was emerging from that journey of self-discovery. At work, I embraced the promotion opportunity with everything I had, proving my worth day after day, and 3 months after the day Michael laughed at me, I received official confirmation. I would be the new project manager, with a significant salary increase and more autonomy. When I got home with the news, he was on the couch as always, and this time I didn't even bother trying to share my joy with him. I just said I had received a promotion. He mumbled congratulations without taking his eyes off the screen, and I smiled to myself, knowing that extra money would be my definitive ticket to freedom, that every cent of that new salary would go straight to my secret account, accelerating my departure plan. 6 months after that fateful Tuesday, I had saved enough money to support myself alone for at least 6 months, had all important documents organized and hidden in a safe place, had a guaranteed space at Jennifer's house, and most importantly, had recovered my inner strength, my self-esteem, my absolute certainty that I deserved much more than what Michael offered. I chose a Saturday to make my exit, a day when he had gone to play golf with friends as he did every week, those 4 sacred hours when he would be out, and I would have enough time to get my things and leave without drama, without confrontation, just a clean and definitive exit. I woke up that day with a mixture of nervousness and euphoria, as if I were about to skydive for the first time, that feeling of fear and freedom happening simultaneously. I prepared his coffee for the last time, watched him eat without really seeing me for the last time, kissed him on the cheek for the last time before he left, and the moment I heard his car leaving the garage, I started moving. I had hired Jennifer and another friend, Catherine, to help me, and they arrived with a small truck Jennifer had managed to borrow from her brother. We took only what was mine: clothes, books, some personal objects that had sentimental value, nothing from the house because I didn't want anything that had his mark. I wanted to start totally from scratch. In less than 2 hours, everything that defined my existence in that house was packed and in the truck, and the house that had been my prison for years suddenly seemed empty and strange, as if it had never really been mine. Before leaving for the last time, I made sure to leave a letter for Michael, not because I thought he deserved an explanation, but because I needed to put into words everything I felt. I needed to have the closure he would never give me. In the letter, I wrote about how that marriage had destroyed me, little by little, about how I had lost myself trying to be what he wanted, about that day when I asked for respect and he laughed, about how that laugh had been simultaneously my end and my new beginning. I wrote that I was leaving not out of anger, but out of self-love, that I didn't hate him, but also couldn't live anymore in a dynamic where I was constantly diminished and disrespected. I said he probably wouldn't understand, that he would probably even laugh again at this letter just as he laughed at my pain, but that I needed it to be on record that the responsibility for the end of that marriage was his, and the choices he made to treat me as less than I was. I ended by saying that my lawyer would be in contact about the divorce proceedings, that I didn't want anything beyond what was rightfully mine, and that I hoped he could, one day, learn to respect the next woman who entered his life, because no one deserved to go through what I went through. I left the letter on top of the kitchen table, next to the keys to the apartment that had been my dwelling but never my home, and walked out the door without looking back, without a tear, without regret, only with a feeling of lightness I hadn't felt in years, as if I had lifted a weight of tons off my shoulders. Life at Jennifer's house was a period of intense reconstruction, where I learned to be myself again, to make decisions without asking permission, to take up space without apologizing, to simply exist without constantly worrying if I was pleasing someone. In the first days, Michael called me several times, sent messages, at first with anger, calling me crazy, ungrateful, saying I would regret it, that without him I was nothing. Then he changed his tone, tried to be affectionate, said he hadn't realized how bad things were, that we could talk, go to couples therapy, that he would change. But I knew that song. I knew they were just empty words from someone who had lost control over me and was desperate to regain it, not because he truly loved me, but because he had lost the convenience of having someone taking care of his life while he could focus only on himself. I blocked his number, kept all communication only through my lawyer, and moved forward with the divorce process. It was revealing to see how, during the legal negotiations, he tried to make everything difficult, claim absurd things, make it seem like I hadn't contributed anything to that marriage. But thanks to all the documentation I had kept, we were able to prove my financial and emotional contribution, and in the end, I received half the value we had in joint investments, enough to make a down payment on a small apartment of my own, the first space that would be truly mine in years. Meanwhile, I focused more and more on my work, where I was prospering in ways I didn't even imagine possible when I was trapped in that suffocating marriage. My promotion had been just the beginning, because once free from the negative energy Michael represented, once able to sleep well without anxiety, eat without a knot in my stomach, simply live without fear of constant judgment, my creativity and productivity exploded. I proposed innovative projects that impressed the board, led my team with empathy and efficiency, and in less than a year, I had received another promotion, this time to marketing director, a position I would never have achieved if I were still under Michael's shadow, telling me I wasn't good enough. I bought my apartment, decorated it my way, with vibrant colors and plants everywhere, exactly the way I always wanted and that he always criticized, saying it was tacky. I adopted a cat, something he never allowed because he said he was allergic, although he had never taken an allergy test in his life. I went back to taking dance classes, a passion I had abandoned because he said I was too old for that. I re-established my friendships, made new friends, built a solid support network of incredible women who celebrated each other instead of competing. I started therapy to process all those years of emotional abuse, because that's what it was. Even without screaming or physical violence, it was abuse in the form of control, manipulation, systematic disrespect. And each session was like peeling off another layer of pain, of guilt that wasn't mine, of shame that had been planted in me by someone who needed to diminish me to feel big. It was in this healing process that I met David, a man completely different from Michael in every possible aspect. I met David at a company networking event. He was a consultant from a partner firm, and what caught my attention about him initially wasn't appearance or status, but the way he treated people around him, with genuine interest and respect, really listening to what they said, instead of just waiting for his turn to speak. We talked for hours at that event, and when he asked for my number, I was honest about coming out of a difficult marriage, about still being in the healing process, about not knowing if I was ready for something new. And you know what he said? That he completely respected my time, that he wasn't in a hurry, that if I wanted just a friendship he would be happy with that, but that he would like to continue talking because he had found my company inspiring. That completely disarmed me because I was so used to men who saw women only as conquests, as objects to satisfy needs, that finding someone who genuinely respected my boundaries and my time seemed almost surreal. We started meeting from time to time, conversations in cafes that extended for hours, walks in the park where we shared life stories, and gradually I realized I was opening up to him in ways I never could with Michael, because David created a safe space where I could be vulnerable without fear of being judged or ridiculed. He asked me about my dreams and really wanted to know, celebrated my professional achievements without any trace of envy or need to compete, respected when I said no to something without making drama or trying to manipulate me. It was so different, so healthy, that sometimes I caught myself waiting for the mask to fall, for him to reveal himself to be another disguised controller. But months passed, and he continued to be consistently respectful, kind, present, but not suffocating. A year and a half after leaving home, on the day my divorce was finally official, I made sure to celebrate, not because I hated Michael or because I was happy the marriage had ended in a sad way, but because I was celebrating my freedom, my courage to have chosen myself, my journey back to who I really was. Jennifer organized a dinner with all the friends who had supported me during that process, including Catherine, Amanda, and Sarah, incredible women who had shown me what true sisterhood was, true unconditional support. We toasted to my new life, to the infinite possibilities opening before me, to the fact that I had survived and, more than that, was thriving. David was also there, because by that point he had become an important part of my life, and at the end of the night, when it was just the two of us walking through the illuminated streets of the city, he asked me if I was ready to try something more serious, a real relationship. I looked at him, at that man who had shown me that not all men were like Michael, that there were people in the world capable of loving without controlling, of supporting without diminishing, of respecting without having to be begged, and I said yes, that I was ready. Because for the first time, I was entering a relationship as a complete woman, whole, who knew her value and wouldn't accept less than she deserved. But the story doesn't end there, because the universe has those delicious ironies that seem like a movie script. About 2 years after leaving home, when I was absolutely happy in my new life, thriving professionally, in a healthy relationship with David, living in my beautiful apartment that was genuinely mine, I ran into Michael at an industry event we both had to attend. I was there as a speaker, had been invited to talk about female leadership and innovation in marketing, a recognition of how much my career had taken off. He was there just as a participant, had been sent by his company. When our eyes met across the room, I saw in him a mixture of emotions, surprise, perhaps a trace of regret, definitely discomfort. I, on the other hand, felt nothing but indifference, that kind of peaceful indifference that comes when you've already completely processed a situation and the person no longer has any power over you. After my talk, which was very well received, with enthusiastic applause and several people approaching me to exchange contacts, he approached. He said he had watched me speak, that he was impressed with where I had gotten to, that clearly I was doing well. I just thanked him politely, without warmth, but without hostility either, just neutral. Then he said something that confirmed everything I always knew about him. He said he had regretted letting me go, that he realized now how valuable I was, that if he had paid more attention, maybe we would still be together. And I laughed. It wasn't a cruel laugh like his had been. It wasn't mockery or revenge. It was simply the genuine laugh of someone who found it absurd that he still didn't understand anything. I told him, calmly, that the problem wasn't that he had let me go. The problem was that he never really had me, because to have someone you need to see that person, respect that person, and he never did either of those things. I said his regret was too late, and more than that, was irrelevant, because I had moved on, had found real happiness, had become the best version of myself precisely because he was no longer in my life pulling me down. He tried to argue, say he had changed, that he was in therapy now, that he would like a second chance. And I just shook my head and said he was getting it all wrong, that this wasn't about giving or not giving a second chance. It was about the fact that I simply didn't want to be with him regardless of how much he had changed, because I had found someone infinitely better. I had found myself, and I had found David, and my life was complete and happy without Michael in it. As I spoke, I saw the realization hitting him, that belated understanding that he had lost something precious through pure selfishness and arrogance, and that there was no going back, no possible fix. It was at that moment I fully understood what the phrase in the title of this story meant, about who laughed last. Because when he laughed at me that Tuesday years ago, when he mocked my pain and my legitimate request for respect, he thought he had won, that he had put me in my place, that he had maintained control. But by doing that, he had planted the seed of his own defeat, because he had given me the final push I needed to leave that toxic situation. And now, years later, who was laughing, or rather, who was genuinely happy, fulfilled, loved, and respected, was me. Who had lost everything, including the opportunity to evolve while he still had something valuable by his side, was him. So yes, who laughed last, who really came out victorious from that whole story, was me. I said goodbye to Michael that night, with a simple nod, went back to David, who was waiting for me on the other side of the room with that proud smile of someone who knew how incredible that talk had been, and we left together for the beautiful life we had built. And you know what I learned from all this? I learned that respect isn't something you should beg for in a relationship, it's the absolute minimum you should demand. I learned that when someone laughs at your pain, when someone mocks your legitimate needs, that person is showing you exactly who they are, and you should believe them. I learned that leaving a bad situation, even when it seems scary, even when you're afraid of the unknown, is always better than staying and dying slowly inside. I learned that you don't need anyone's validation to know your worth, that your worth is intrinsic, exists regardless of whether someone recognizes it or not. I learned that it is possible to rebuild yourself after years of being destroyed, that it's never too late to start over, that you always deserve respect, true love, dignity. And I learned that sometimes the best revenge isn't doing something against the person who hurt you, but simply living so well, being so happy, thriving so much that it becomes obvious how much they lost when they chose to disrespect you. Michael laughed when I asked for respect, but I laughed, a light and genuine laugh of pure happiness, when I realized I was free from him and everything he represented. And that laugh, that feeling of quiet victory, of inner peace, of knowing I chose myself and don't regret it for a single second, that no one can take away from me. So if you're out there, living a similar situation, being disrespected, diminished, treated as if you had no value, I want you to know you have a choice. You always have a choice. And choosing yourself isn't selfishness, it's survival, it's dignity, it's self-love of the purest kind. And when you make that choice, when you take that first step toward your freedom, even if scared, even if not knowing exactly what comes next, you'll understand that in the end, who really matters, who really needs to laugh with happiness, with relief, with pride for having had courage, is yourself. Because this is your story, your life, and you deserve to be the heroine of it, not the supporting character in someone else's story who doesn't even respect you. So tell me, have you gone through something similar? Have you had to make the difficult choice to leave a relationship where you weren't respected? How was your reconstruction process? Leave your comment down here, subscribe to the channel for more stories of overcoming and female strength, and leave your like if this story touched your heart in some way. Because the more we share these experiences, the more women will realize they're not alone, that it is possible to start over, and that they deserve much more than crumbs of respect from someone who should truly love them.